Well, good morning. It's Thursday morning, and today we're going to read Acts 4, 36 and 37, just two verses. Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet, which is what verse 35 says everybody used to do. So who was Barnabas anyway, Barnabas is one of those guys that everybody in the New Testament knew about and knew. He was a prominent member of the earliest assembly of the Christians here in Jerusalem. He later is one of Paul's closest companions on one of his missionary journeys, and they travel throughout present-day Turkey, converting the Gentiles and preaching the gospel there. And he was a part of Paul's ministry. Tradition says he was martyred in Cyprus, which is where he came from, so that's kind of interesting. It's a small island in the Mediterranean, so if that's where he started, then that's kind of where he finished. Some people in the early church thought that he was the author of the book of Hebrews. We don't know who wrote Hebrews. It's traditionally assigned to Paul, but it's not really a product of Paul's work, we don't think. So he may have written Hebrews, he may not. Some other people had some other ideas about him, but we just don't know enough to know for sure that he wrote this or that. But he was close to those who were writing a lot of stuff, so he may have. So that's who Barnabas was. We don't know much about him. He was one of those encouraging people who stands to the side of the main guy. So you got Paul, and everybody knows Paul and loves Paul, but who's standing beside Paul is Barnabas, and has all kinds of adventures with Paul. Now, so here Barnabas happens to own a field somewhere near Jerusalem, and he sells it, and he brings the money and lays it down at the apostles' feet. So sort of says, here's my offering. I sold my field, and everybody is happy. All of that sets up what's happening next, which we'll get to tomorrow and Saturday, with some people who aren't quite as forthcoming with their offerings and their story. So in a way, we're being set up here, but it's interesting that it includes details about Barnabas. There are a lot of people in the church who do a lot of good things week in and week out, and no one ever mentions their name or thanks them publicly very much, or even people don't know much about them, except that, somehow this happens all the time, and somebody must do it. And if you only notice that anything about it when it stops happening, when someone just doesn't show up and all of a sudden no one knows what to do. I'm talking about things like the person who runs the sound system every week. Really all they do, I don't want to make light of it, but they kind of come in and turn it on. But if nobody turns it on, then everybody panics, or sees to it that the lights and the heat or the air is running properly on a Sunday morning, or checks on the candles. Most places nowadays don't use actual candles. We use they're these tubes, and inside them you put a little tiny candle, which burns for about an hour and a half. And so you got to check at the beginning of the service to make sure there's a fresh, full insert in there, or maybe there's some oil that you pour in it to burn. Either way, somebody's got to do it, or else the candle is just going to go out in the middle of the service, and you don't want that. What else? There's always somebody who's taking care of the kitchen. Every church I know of has somebody who is the unofficial kitchen officer and who generally runs a pretty tight ship. And so you can't just leave stuff in the fridge for 6 months or in the freezer for 2 years or dirty dishes piled up, because they're going to find you and they're going to get you, and they're going to want you to do better. So that's a person, and again, we don't have them listed on the back of the bulletin with the staff and the officers, but that's a person who's important to the work of the church. Now, there are all kinds of ministries that go on, and there are people involved in those ministries who are important, key people. And if one of them walks away or stops for whatever reason, then you got a problem, and you don't want that. So Barnabas is one of those people. He's important to the ministry of the early church. Everybody knows him. He's called the son of encouragement, which means that he probably was a good, encouraging person to have around. And yet he fades into the mist of history with very little known about him. And so there you go. Well, think about Barnabas and his offering, because tomorrow we're going to read about somebody who had a different take on offerings, and who was punished for it, frankly. So I'll leave you with that. You have a great Thursday, and we will see you Friday morning.